Good morning. Thanks for being here. You're listening to Redline on WDET. I'm Bankole Thompson. President Obama has a monumental opportunity to shift the balance of power on the U.S. Supreme Court following the demise of conservative Justice Antonin Scalia. But it's a long road to select the next justice, and Republicans are already digging in their heels to oppose the president's next nominee. We begin the conversation this morning on Redline by looking at the politics of selecting the next Supreme Court justice. Joining me now is Robert Weiner, former White House spokesman, joining me from Washington. Thank you very much, Bob, for being on the program.
It's a pleasure, Bankole.
Thank you so much. Let me begin with your reaction to Antonin Scalia's death.
Well, let me just tell you that I was the director of communications, as you know, for Congressman John Conyers, who's been the ranking Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee. And Patrick Leahy is the senator from Vermont, the Democrat who is the ranking Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee. Both are outraged that the Republicans would delay a vote when the Constitution says shall, not might or could, but shall confirm. The president nominates, the Senate confirms, and it doesn't say wait for the politics of the election.
Right.
Now, Scalia is a convivial guy. My wife and I, Pat Berg, and I have talked with him in the Kennedy Center, and he would just sort of joke and gloss over his Supreme Court role. When the voting rights issue came up, Bankole, we talked with him.
The Section 5, right.
But when we talked with Ginsburg, Justice Ginsburg, who also was at the Kennedy Center, no messing around. She said, it's in the Constitution. When Scalia, you remember, the next day said, well, I don't know if we should give Congress the power because they're kind of provincial. You remember his statement on the bench, the oral statement he made on that? And so by that 5-4 vote, he blocked the rights of Congress to continue the Voting Rights Act, which is an outrage, and which, of course, is how minorities have been guaranteed equal access to the ballot all across the country. Whereas Ginsburg, by that in her minority, said that, of course, it's in the Constitution, which is what she told us privately also when we spoke with her at the Kennedy Center. So he's a nice guy, but a dangerous guy, an elitist know-it-all. And I tell people, Bankole, that you can learn more by reading the Constitution. It takes an hour and a half. It's a short document. It's 20 pages, and they sell it for $1 at the Capitol Visitor Center. And we wrote a piece in the Hill that said everybody should read the Constitution, because if you do, the Constitution says very clearly, for example, that Congress shall reduce, it has penalties in there, reduce the right of electors in states by the proportion that a state denies the vote to populations without any reason to do so. And that's exactly what Scalia did, and it's clear that he did not, read the Constitution on this issue, for example.
All right. You're listening to Redline on WDET. My guest right now is Bob Weiner, former White House spokesman, reacting to Justice Scalia's death, of course, speaking about his legacy, and as well as President Obama gets to select the next nominee. Let's talk about that, the selection process. Republican presidential candidates have already indicated that the president should wait for 12 months. Explain if there's any rationale behind that.
Well, sure there's a rationale. To them, they're scared to death. As Cruz said, that one vote would reverse the Heller decision of 3 years ago, that by 5-4 said that it isn't the right of, it isn't necessary to form a militia. It's the right of everyone to bear arms, except for the fact that the Constitution says very specifically that in forming a militia, the right to bear arms shall not be infringed. Those are the words from the Constitution. So the NRA has such power, and by 5-4, used that power to block the states from taking appropriate action that could stop these mass murder slaughters that we have, for example.
So you're basically saying Scalia's death presents a huge threat to the NRA?
Absolutely, and to Citizens United, which George Mitchell told us in front of the National Press Club when I hosted him, Bankole, the former leader of the U.S. Senate, that Citizens United is the worst decision in the history of the Supreme Court. It put money into politics. And this is a court, as Hillary Clinton has said, that money is free speech, and the Supreme Court by 5-4 wants that. We have immigration coming. They've, by 5-4, weakened Roe v. Wade, women's choice, and there's a Texas case coming.
The affirmative action case, Texas.
That's correct, and affirmative action, and unions raising dues, as well as the guns case. So it is a huge mistake for the Democrats to let this go. And I've seen the statements, as I said, from both Leahy and Conyers now, the leaders of the Democrats. But it's not a Democratic-Republican issue any more than when Justice Kennedy was confirmed in February of an election year. The Constitution does not say in an election year the opposition party should delay. It doesn't say that. The Congress has to do its job. The Senate has to do its job. And Bankole, that's an outrage that they are playing politics with the Constitution when they claim to be the constitutional party.
So let's talk about President Obama himself. He gets to select who this nominee is. He gets to shift the balance of power. He basically gets to solidify his legacy on the court for decades to come. How do you think the president gets to approach, as a former spokesman at the White House, how does the president get to approach this difficult decision?
Well, this president also is a constitutional professor.
Law professor,
remember.
That's correct. Yes.
He knows what he's talking about. And one of the leading contenders is a 97-0 top court judge now that the Republicans already confirmed 97-0. So they're going to be hard-pressed to say that this is a political decision when the president, who gave his statement already, said that he will shortly be naming someone and he expects the Senate to do their job. So legacy is not the issue, Bankole. It's not a self-centered thing for Obama's legacy, and he's had an incredible legacy that the Republicans want to deny in terms of what he's accomplished. But that's not the point here. The point is the law of the land, and you know, it's 5-4 on Bush v. Gore.
Right.
So it's a matter of who we can have as a lawyer. It doesn't even have to be a lawyer. As a member of the Supreme Court, that the president gets to choose, and the Senate should confirm. So if the Senate refuses to, because of Republican politics, they are handing the Democrats a huge, huge issue, proving once more their gridlock and delay against anything positive. And that's where this is going to land. And that's what you saw on the stage of the Republican debate, that all of them, without question, even Trump, who's kind of liberal on a couple of things, said delay, delay, delay. So that's where they are, and it's to their own peril.
So, do you have any names in mind, and any names been floated around in terms of who President Obama gets to select?
I'm not going to be the one naming them, but there's speculation of the Superior Court judge of D.C., who's Shuri Nashin. How does he pronounce his name?
I've seen that name around too.
Yeah, who was confirmed 97-0 is now considered the lead candidate. But there are others that are out there too. There are any number of non-controversial candidates who are out there, Bankole, that should be confirmed.
What do you think about Kamala Harris out of California, the former California Attorney General? I've seen her name on the internet as well, been mentioned.
Another outstanding candidate. I mean, but the problem here's what my prediction. The Republicans won't listen to me. They won't listen to you. They won't listen to President Obama. They won't listen to John Conyers, and they won't listen to Patrick Leahy. They are going to delay because they play killer instinct. They play as they did in Bush v. Gore and in restricting the reapportionment of the states and all of that. They play to the death, the Tom DeLay death strategy. Democrats play for progress and winning, like infrastructure jobs and tuition and choice. And allowing the progress of the country to go forward, education and so forth. The Republicans play death so they can have their military expenditures and cut the budget. That's what the Republicans do.
So given that the Senate is in recess, and this has been talked about in social media, that the president could actually place someone in the court given that the Senate is in recess, the president is not going to go that route, will he?
Well, I would hope he would. You
want him to appoint a justice in recess?
I wasn't going to really talk about, because he should do it a little quietly if that's what he's going to do. But that's exactly what he has the power to do as a recess appointment. The problem there again is that even though it's in the Constitution that if the Senate adjourns for more than 3 days, they do not have the power to act. Then the president, and they ruled on the president's recess appointments not having the power, because what the Senate does is they do a playful session. They do a pro forma where they keep one guy in town and he sits at the desk and he gavels it, and that counts as a Senate session. Okay. So they're probably smart enough to avoid that.
So the president can do a recess appointment basically to the court. And
no, what I'm saying is that, but the Senate is smart enough to have one guy sitting there at the desk so that he'll have him gavel the Senate to order once every 3 days, and that meets the requirement of the Constitution. And the Supreme Court already ruled that counts, even though it's a sham.
Oh, so they'll have a watchdog, if you will,
That's right.
case the president to kind of basically.
Well, I hope they're asleep at the switch. Okay, now we're out in the open talking about this. I hope they're asleep at the switch and we get away with it, where they don't do that. And if they don't, you can be assured that the split second it doesn't happen, that nominee will come in.
How much of the presidential campaign, if you will, Democrats, Republicans, how much is this going to be an issue? We've seen the presidential Republican candidates talking about this. There's very little from the Democratic side to the reaction of Antonin Scalia's death.
No, it's huge. And Hillary Clinton was already out there with a statement today on it. We're only a day after he died. And so it's huge on the outrage of them delaying the appointment. So it is a huge issue. The Democrats will use it properly, showing that the Republicans want nothing but gridlock, and the Democrats will push forward on the constitutional responsibility to have the Supreme Court able to rule. But let me tell you something. Even if they don't, even if the Republicans block it, which is what I anticipate, at their own peril, and I think it's a big and positive issue for the Democrats if that's what the Republicans do, we still gain a vote because it's 4-4 instead of 5-4 against us. So it's a huge development. And it's possible that the Republicans, if they would agree to a nominee, might have a more fair, because you never know who's going to vote how. Berger and all that. They never knew how those people really were going to vote. So they really are at their own peril to not allow a nominee. But even if they don't, we got 4-4, which is a gain of 1 over 5-4.
But are the Democrats also in a tricky position? I mean, given that the death of Scalia puts both Republican and Democratic campaigns in overdrive, given that if in fact President Obama gets to select a nominee that's not approved by the progressives in the Democratic camp, what happens? Do you have a civil war in the Democratic Party?
Well, he will put forward someone who is pro-choice and wants to overturn Citizens United. I can't imagine. I mean, you can use the word progressive, but even moderates, Bankole, are there. In fact, even Trump said that Citizens United and the unlimited money and the PAC spending has to be changed. So I think that there's actually on Citizens United, the court just went overboard even beyond Republicans. I think that a new court with a nominee who wants to overturn Citizens United is from moderate on up. The only one you would get that would not allow that is an ultra-conservative, which is what you'll get if there's a Republican president. So that hands us a wonderful issue.
Why do you think that Scalia had so much impact on the court since his appointment? Is it because of the longevity being on the court since 1986?
Well, that's right. He was a long-serving judge, but his intellect. He had a funny intellect and a warming personality. And as I mentioned to you, my wife and I have witnessed that. He's a very funny, warm, engaging guy. But he also is elitist and full of himself and know-it-all. And, for all of his pretend of intellect, he doesn't read the Constitution with provisions that I mentioned. For example, on guns and voting rights. He was just dead wrong on the Constitution. If you spend the hour and a half and read the Constitution and circle and block mark it, which I would urge all of your very intelligent listeners, since this is an NPR station and Detroit Public Radio, and NPR has the smartest listeners in the world, and I'm not making that up, that just buy a copy of the Constitution for $1 and read it and circle the provisions, and you'll know more than the Supreme Court judges do, apparently.
All right, and while I have you on, let's talk about the presidential campaign. There's a Democratic debate slated here in Michigan on March 6th, and the Republican debate March 3rd, actually 3 days before the Democratic debate at the Fox Theater. So Michigan is having a center role here. But on the Democratic side, what's your take on Bernie Sanders and Hillary Clinton?
Surprise of Bernie's power. But Hillary, I believe it's going to be like a World Series match where she lost, well, she actually tied the first one.
World Series, so this is like the Super Bowl, right?
In the sense that she lost the first 2 and will win the next 4, because I can't see how, starting with Super Tuesday, with the demographics of African Americans, I can't see, and Hispanics, more powerful than the nearly none that they had in Iowa and New Hampshire, how she does anything but really clean up. So, and deservedly, with her whole history of what she's done from legal services on through her entire career, and her statements on the Voting Rights Act, and her point that, yes, Bernie's fine, but he's only making these statements now, lately, And he's really weak on guns, having voted against the Brady bill 5 times for assault weapons and for immunity for the gun manufacturers. So she's got an issue on him there. So I think that it becomes Hillary's to lose after Nevada, where it's a tie. That could go either way also. But the minute that Nevada's over and we go into South Carolina and then Super Tuesday, I think it becomes nearly a Hillary sweep.
All right. On the Republican side, you think Donald Trump are set to emerge as the nominee for the Republican Party?
He's 42-20 as of today in South Carolina. Cruz was shown to be a liar, as Trump said in the debate, that he stole votes from Carson by claiming Carson was dropping out, lying about it. And that did Carson no good. It did Cruz no good. And Rubio did himself no good by being Mr. Robotic Repeater 5 times. How that happened? I mean, how anybody does that? So I think it's Trump's. People want bold. They disagree with some of his statements. You know, his latest foot in his mouth after he did the women with the blood and the McCain's not a war hero and Hispanics coming from Mexico are racist.
Would he be the nominee?
You know, his latest was, George Bush and 9/11 and the World Trade Center went down on his watch. Absolutely true, by the way. But there was even a memo that said that he ignored that said Bin Laden to attack big buildings with planes in the United States, and he just ignored it from his National Security Council. But nonetheless, politically from that side in South Carolina, that's a problem for him to be dissing the Bushes. And so he may lose a little bit, but I can't see him losing much. And I think he wins by 20 in South Carolina and then just streams forward.
Do you see him becoming the nominee?
I think so, because after he wins all this stuff, and there's a lot of winner-take-all states after Super Tuesday also, and then even if he wins 35-30 or 25-20, he still wins. I can't see, every convention, Bankole, you and I have witnessed it. It's going to be a brokered convention, Kennedy against Carter and, Reagan against Bush and all. It never happens because the momentum and the swell is so overwhelming as we approach each convention. I don't see it. I think Republicans are rationalizing more and more about Trump would be better than Cruz, and they're starting to rationalize for Trump now. I could be wrong. And this is something we all know, Bankole. A year in front of every election, we're always wrong. I mean, Jimmy, where was Obama a year in front? He was getting bashed by Hillary. Where was Jimmy Carter? Nowhere. Where was Bill Clinton? Nowhere. Richard Nixon, you weren't going to have him to kick around anymore, and on and on. So a friend and I have a game that we play. He was a Mondale advance guy, to predict a year out, and you never even think of the nominee.
We will check back with you, Bob, as we, of course, march to the nomination, Republican and Democratic nominations. Thank you so much for joining us.
Pleasure, Bankole. Congratulations again.
Thank you. All right. Up next, the Reverend Jesse Jackson responds to Antonin Scalia's death, and we will discuss the big civil rights march taking place in Flint tomorrow. The Reverend Jackson and others, including ministers in Flint, are planning. We'll be right back.